evening and welcome to our second panel event. So tonight we're talking about restorative justice after sexual abuse and violence. Last week was our introduction just before the actual consultation went live. So we discussed what Survivors' Voices is, what the consultation is, and some of the myths and misconceptions around restorative justice. So the consultation is now live. It's all through our social media and on the website, so you can get access to it. And we'll also add it to this post tonight and after the live. So the consultation is effectively a questionnaire for survivors to fill in to give their view on restorative justice. When you go into it, there is plenty of information, advice, videos to watch in advance. So there's a good lead into it as well before you get to the questionnaire. So on to tonight. Like I said, we're going to discuss restorative justice after sexual abuse and violence. And tonight's guests, so we have Pam from Say Women. We've got Vicky, who's our survivor on tonight. And we've got Estelle from Napier University. You'll also see we've got Victoria. So Victoria keeps an eye on your comments and your chat. So any questions, put them into the chat and Victoria will let me know if you've got anything you want to ask anybody. And we've also got Jackie, who is doing artistic representation of tonight. So we'll kick off straight away. So first of all, Vicky. So Vicky, you're here as a survivor. Can you tell us about your story, how you came to hear about Survivors' Voices and why you wanted to be involved?
Okay, so my name's Vicky. I mean, I could talk about this story for a lifetime, but obviously I don't have very much time. So to cut a long story short, I stood in Edinburgh High Court and watched my ex-partner being sentenced to 10 years in prison. I was one of a few girls that were involved in the case, and we were successful in gaining a conviction against him. He was convicted of 21 charges, including rape, attempted murder, assault to endangerment of life, counts of sexual assault, and other assaults. So yeah, quite a big profile case. It was all over the media and the newspaper and things. So I used my experience, and so I'm now in my final year of my social work degree. I'm about to do my dissertation on restorative justice on this very topic. And it was actually my tutor at university that pinged me an email late one night saying, maybe you should just check this out. And I did. I had a wee look, and I was really impressed that other people felt passionate about something the way that I did, and was trying to make positive change for survivors of domestic abuse. So that's really how I got here. I emailed Isobel and joined the focus group, and now I'm here.
Excellent. Thank you, Vicky. So Estelle, you're joining us as the expert in restorative justice. Can you, like Vicky, tell us about yourself, your experience, your books, and yeah, if you can share your story.
Thank you very much, Heather. So thank you for giving me the floor. I prepared a few notes. I was asked to talk about my journey towards or with this topic. So after some multidisciplinary studies, which I did a long time ago, first degree in languages and history in France and a master's in political science at the University of Edinburgh, I completed a PhD in law at Queen's University Belfast on sexual violence against women in armed conflicts, which I defended in 2008, which looked at whether there was a transitional justice perspective that was possible for this particular types of victims and this particular type of crime. It is through this particular journey that I came to for the first time to hear about restorative justice. My PhD supervisor, Professor Kieran McEvoy, who was quite involved in the transitional justice process yet there in Northern Ireland and the development of restorative justice in its potential use in crimes committed by paramilitary groups in the Northern Irish Troubles. He was the one who saw the potential in my own project for RJ. And to start with, I was very skeptical, and if not downright opposed to it, like most people naturally are when they don't know something. And the more I looked into this specific type of violence and the response available to the survivors, but also the potential of such an approach and sets of programs and possibilities, the more I became convinced of the merits and need for it. And it is a fact that in such circumstances, some form of RJ is already taking place in a lot of places. In 2009, I then took up a position as a coordinator and main researcher of a European Commission-funded project in Leuven in Belgium. For the European Forum for Restorative Justice. The project was on conferencing, which is a particular type of program within restorative justice. The main question was whether it had potential in Europe, since conferencing had originated in New Zealand and Australia and had to some extent been developed in North America, but was still quite embryonic in most of Europe. The idea was also to compare with the more common victim offender mediation programs, and it was a large project, and the results were quite enlightening, if a little surprising. Despite the widespread belief that RJ should mostly be used for juvenile offenders and for minor crimes, especially in countries that just start to use RJ, most professionals, practitioners, criminal justice professionals or academics, but also stakeholders, victims and offenders, say that RJ is most efficient with serious crimes and can have satisfactory results with adults as well. Another finding, which was for me very important, if not a game changer, is that despite common belief that it's not appropriate or desirable to have sexual violence survivors meet with their offender, in theory, in actual fact, it already happens in many different settings for very serious crimes and with different means and ways, whether within therapeutic environments or within prisons, within church settings, or within RJ organizations. A number of RJ programs told us that they had taken on such cases mostly because they were asked by survivors, but kept it under the radar because of the nature of the crime and mostly also because of public perception of it and this general feeling, negative feeling that people have towards it. This, of course, rang a number of alarm bells for us, and because this means that it is done without appropriate training for the facilitators, without proper methodology, it is all ad hoc, without checks and balances, and therefore carries many risks. You can find the report and the practice guide that were produced from this big project freely available on the website of the European Forum for Restorative Justice. And a book was published out of this as well in 2012. Both these findings I just talked about were what made me want to know more. And while working as a senior researcher at the University of Leuven in Belgium still, in their Institute of Criminology, I wrote up a proposal for a large project to explore the possibilities of using RJ for sexual violence with the help of other very established people who had already worked on this in the US, Mary Koss and Kathleen Daly in Australia, but also Ivo Artsen in Belgium and Mary Keenan from the Republic of Ireland. We eventually got funded, and the idea was to look into the different practices that exist already around the world, the different contexts in which they take place, and the training methods, outcome they entail. The main findings showed that the fact that it is being used already in most countries, never in huge numbers, of course, but even in those countries where it was officially banned, like Spain, it is mostly initiated by survivors themselves who need answers, who need a safe platform to talk to the person who has harmed them, as they are the only ones who can answer specific questions about the case. But I'll come back a bit later. Through this project, we've gathered a very large amount of data, and there is a practice guide that is also freely available on the European Forum for Restorative Justice site. There contributed a number of academic articles, but also non-academic that are also available, for example, within the Scottish Justice Masters publication. And currently finishing another book with Murray Keenan, my main research partner from the University College Dublin. But I think that's enough from me. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Estelle. So Pam, over to you now. So obviously you're here from Say Women. So can you tell us about yourself and about the work that Say Women does as well?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I'm getting led away by the conversation there. So I'm chief exec of a charity called Say Women. We're a charity that started in 1991 on the basis of the CHAR report, which identified that out of every 10 young women who are homeless, 4 of them were homeless because they've been sexually abused. So we support 16 to 25-year-old young women. We're a feminist organisation, and these young women have experienced homelessness or at risk of homelessness because they've been sexually abused as a child. We provide training to organisations in the homelessness arena to try and help them understand the connection between sexual abuse and homelessness. We believe that a lot of the victims of sexual abuse that we work with behave in ways that sometimes make tenancies unacceptable. They have chaotic behaviours, but we believe this is because of what's happened to them rather than what is wrong with them. So the social model versus the medical model. And we work very closely with the Judith Herman model, which divides trauma, for those that are listening that don't know. It divides working with trauma into 3 stages. First of all, ensuring physical safety. Secondly, to then go into remembrance and mourning. And then thirdly, for connectivity to yourself and to others. We also have a tenancy sustainment part of our charity, where we work with local authorities and housing associations to ensure that the survivor is identified, that we're giving a gendered specific approach to helping them understand their trauma and therefore keep their tenancy. So all in all, we work with about 50 young women throughout the year. We've got an accommodation unit that houses 8 young women, often coming straight from homelessness into a brilliant, their own lock and key flat with, you know, their own kitchen, their own bathroom, their own bed, and we house it all up and make it look nice for them. So it's obviously the first time for a 16 to 25-year-old to go into somewhere where they probably are first time feeling physically safe. And helping them understand that and cope with the tenancy that goes on. So yeah, I've been chief exec of the charity for about just coming up for 3 years now. I described the charity as being an injection of joy when I first arrived. We are incredibly passionate and proactive team, and we care extremely well for the young women that we support.
Excellent, thank you so much. Okay, so you're all quite different, all like tons of experience in your own fields. So I'm now going to ask you all to give me your opinion on restorative justice after sexual abuse and violence, and what your view is on it, and actually what your reasonings behind it is as well. So Vicky, we'll start with you.
Okay. So restorative justice was something that I probably would have been very sceptical about, didn't know very much about at all. My ex-partner, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. So he was eligible for parole a couple of years ago, and he was automatically released July last year. Now, since he was eligible for parole, the unknown has played on my mind severely. Obviously, as a survivor, you're not given the information as to whether the offender has engaged in any forms of programs of self-help, things to amend their offending behaviour. So for me, I was advised that he was returning to our local authority area. So he was rehoused on his release from prison. So he stays within my local authority area. My eldest child, his biological dad is the person who inflicted the harm and who was sentenced to 10 years in prison and is on the sex offender register indefinitely. For me, personally, restorative justice is something that I would never have considered till probably about 2-3 years ago. I was quite happy in my safe bubble in my own family, and nearing the release, nearing his release, I was really anxious, knowing that he was being released back to our local area. It caused, and it still does cause me fear, because I don't know how he would react. I don't know how I would react. Do you know, this I could meet him in the supermarket, I could meet him crossing the road. And for me, restorative justice obviously has never been offered. However, in the last couple of years, for me, if it had been offered and if he had accepted, it's something that I definitely would have participated in. Now, I know that restorative justice is not for everyone, and I totally respect that. But as a survivor myself, for me, it's something that I definitely would have participated in. I think to alleviate the fears of the unknown, and perhaps to understand where he was at now, because obviously, having been imprisoned for 7 years, I was unaware whether he'd become institutionalized. I didn't know what frame of mind he was going to be in. And I had, and I still have, a lot of questions, whether he would, obviously with the restorative justice being a two-way thing, he would obviously need to want to participate in that with me, but certainly it's something that I would be very open to. And although I know that it's not an option for some people, I don't think, unless you're in that situation, whether you're the perpetrator or the survivor, nobody can really make that decision for you. Do you know, nobody knows how you're feeling and how your response is. I mean, I know myself, if I'd said to my family and some of my friends, oh, I would actually really quite like to meet him in a safe environment to talk over what has happened in future plans and things about how we would approach the situation of meeting each other in a social setting or whatever, they would think I was absolutely crazy. But in my head, for me, I think I'd be able to rationalise things better, because I like being in control of things in my situation. But I completely respect it's not for everybody. Some people, never ever want to see their abuser again, and I totally respect that, and I totally understand that. But in my experience, I almost feel like, as a survivor, my voice is lost in the whole situation. I don't feel like anybody's actually said to me, what is it that you would like? After the court case, I've not really heard from anybody up until his release last year. And obviously with human rights and things, nobody's really keen to tell you anything anyway, which I get for his own safety as well. So that's where I'm at personally. And then whilst I'm undertaking all this studies for my dissertation as well, Scotland has a huge imprisonment rate. We've got a huge reoffending rate as well. And the fact of restorative justice is that can reduce reoffending. And I really don't understand why money's not being invested in something that could potentially stop people reoffending. I mean, I don't know. I really don't know, but I would like to think, if I was sat across from the person that caused me harm and in a safe environment and had an honest conversation, perhaps the offender management unit, his criminal justice social worker that oversees him while he's supervising the community for the next 3 years, perhaps they would be able to better risk assess. If he took responsibility for what he'd done, and perhaps showed some form of remorse if he was to engage in a restorative justice process. And obviously that doesn't just go for me, that'll go for other perpetrators as well. But I just think in this day and age, people should be empowered to say what they want and how they feel in a safe setting. So for that reason, although I absolutely acknowledge it's not for everybody, I think it's something that should be offered as an option for survivors of domestic abuse and sexual abuse.
Thanks, Vicky. So obviously you're saying that this started to became more aware of it, obviously, with your abuser leaving prison. Do you think that it's definitely a timing thing for you? Would you have felt comfortable considering it, say, before he went into prison or during the case, or do you think that the timing is key for you?
Think for me personally, timing's key. I was at the start really bitter, angry, hurt, upset. Although at Edinburgh High Court, I actually being able to tell my story and it felt like a safe place. You know, he was there and he was able to hear what he'd done to me as well as the jury and what he'd done to other people. I had a voice then and I felt in control, although it was very much out of control then, but I felt in control. So for me, I think timing's key. I personally wouldn't have considered it till, as I say, the last 2-3 years. And I think it's because I'm well down the road in my recovery. You know, I'm remarried, I've got the kids, I'm settled in my job, I'm almost finished and qualified as a social worker. So for me, timing's key, because the emotions were running high, things were really raw, and I think probably my worst nightmare would have been sat across a table from him back then. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So Estelle, what's your view on restorative justice?
Well, I truly believe that RJ has a place after sexual violence and abuse, and that the possibility to enter such a process should be available and used when appropriate. It is a fact that is not appropriate in some cases, as Vicky said, and if safety cannot be guaranteed, then it should not take place. The fact is, however, that for now in Scotland, there is not capacity as yet to provide RJ in such cases, but in my opinion, there should be, and it should be developed alongside the development of RJ in all other contexts. And despite Scottish Government's commitment to have RJ available by 2023 for everyone in Scotland, there has been a hesitation whether this includes persons who have been affected by sexual and domestic violence. This hesitation is for me quite ununderstandable, as it mostly stems from a lack of comprehension, in my opinion, about what RJ is and can do. From speaking with a number of survivors who have gone through the process in other countries and other places, and whether it ended up in a meeting or not, because it's not just about the meeting, it's the whole process of exchanging and communicating, whether directly or indirectly with the person who has harmed, i.e. the offender, can have as much effect as a direct meeting. It is mostly about rebalancing the power imbalance created by the harm or series of harm. And it is about giving a safe space for people to talk about the harm or the conflict, should they wish to, and try to find together a way to move forward. It is a fact that many survivors do not feel the need to talk to the offender for many different reasons, but there's many who feel the need to talk to the offender, and for different reasons, and not always about the crime itself. But RJ, when done well, can really provide a platform to do that safely and contribute to healing, moving on, and sometimes bringing closure. Such a process is meant mostly for survivors to be able to ask questions about the crime, to discuss its background, its nature, the reasons why it happened. But not only. Sometimes the discussion can be about other topics which might be important to the survivor. It is, of course, also to let the offender know how they feel and how the harm made them feel. It is complicated by the nature and type of crime that it is. As said, not all cases are appropriate, and most cases do not go ahead. But I wanted to address some of the common misconceptions for this particular here, it is never and never should be about forgiveness or apology. This sometimes happens in the course of such a process, but it should not be the aim. And if it happens, this is something between the stakeholders and the facilitator. It cannot be expected and should not be something used, although there is some debate about the use of apology in some countries, like I've seen in Denmark, where the offenders were trained to apologize as part of that process. And to be clear, reconciliation is never an aim and never can be. This is absolutely not the conversation. Also, in most countries, it is an independent process from the court case, if there is one, because as we know, a lot of sexual violence doesn't get to court. But if there is, it should not influence each other. It is neither an easy way out for the offender, nor for the survivor to lose their right to have their case prosecuted. In cases where RJ might be sought before or during a court case, for example, in Belgium, there is a sort of firewall between the two processes. They cannot influence each other. Reports can be made about the process, for example, to the court, but only with the express consent of both parties. There are a number of ways that RJ can be implemented. It can be a direct meeting between two main parties facilitated by a trained facilitator after thorough preparations, but it also can take place as an indirect meeting, still with lots of preparation, but through online platforms, video links, phones, letters, or through the facilitators. But as said, it's not always appropriate, and there are always risks involved. And therefore, it is very important that the following is done if a case gets the go-ahead. Risk assessments are primordial. It is crucial that participation is voluntary for both parties, that the offender recognizes or at least does not deny the harm that he or she has inflicted, and before anything is undertaken, that the participation can be stopped by either parties at any time of the process, that the meetings and exchanges are facilitated by specialized facilitators trained specifically for this type of cases on trauma and sexual offense dynamics, and that the facilitators are deemed acceptable by the parties. One of the participants might not feel comfortable with the facilitator that has been chosen, and the person should be allowed to say it and the facilitator to be changed. The preparation of the meeting or exchange is absolutely crucial too. All possible aspects have to be covered to avoid possible re-victimization. Any attempt for an offender to intimidate or to try to control the victim need to be explored beforehand in a shuttle exercise undertaken by the facilitator. It is crucial also that the timing is right. Some survivors, and Vicky explained that very well, might need it soon after their victimization. Some might need it much later. And RJ should be able to accommodate this and be flexible enough to accommodate this. That's the only way it can work. But this also means that in order to make the decision to undertake such a process that is right for you and that the time is right for you, then you should have the tools. By that, I mean the information about such a possibility. And to be able to make an informed decision as to undertaking such a journey. As an example, and it is an extreme one, but when we interviewed staff at the sexual violence unit for children in Denmark, they explained to us that they talked to the young victims about RJ within a few days of their admission into hospital. And of course, it is not about using it at that stage, and certainly not for a long time, but it is just to give them the tools for their own recovery, that they can choose what is going to work for them, what is their need going to be, and that they have that at their disposal. So anyway, I am really glad this panel is taking place tonight, and that we're able to discuss the topic. I'm really happy also that Striving Survivors has undertaken this consultation, because it is the voice of the survivors that we should listen to. No one else can talk for them. We can accompany them in their journey, make it safe, helpful, beneficial as beneficial as possible. But that is all. Thank you.
Thanks, Estelle. That's fantastic. So we've got one question for you here from people watching. in Estelle's experience, where in their healing process were these women that RJ has worked for?
That's a very personal question. It's for every journey, it's going to be different. And I don't think there is an answer to that question. Every person who has unfortunately gone through such an experience will feel at some point, knowing that they have this possibility, maybe the need. I mean, Vicky's experience is in this strange, crazy world is a fairly normal one, that the moment you know that the offender will be coming out, and I've heard it before from other victims had very similar, or survivors, very similar feeling, but some need it earlier and some might need it 40 years later. A lot of historical cases, for say, of church sexual abuse, victims would like to be able to talk to their offenders when their grandparents, when their own parents have died, or something that triggers the need to do this. And I don't think we can prescribe a time limit.
Yeah, thank you. So Pam, obviously working with 50 young women every year, you'll have seen people at all stages of recovery. So I'm interested to hear your point of view on this as well.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks, Heather. I think in principle, first of all, I totally agree with the option for personal choice, so long as it's with full knowledge with the associated risks. But as far as Say Women's concerned, we support our young women in a way that has always been about their own recovery and her reclaiming her life back independent of the abuser. So Say Women has never relied on justice as part of the young women's healing process. But we will act as an advocate to challenge the judicial system when it's failing, but the recovery should be independent of this completely. And in discussion with the charity and our organisation, there's specific areas that we're concerned about with RJ. And you might well see this as being ignorance, but this is our concerns in reality about it. So who is it really benefiting? Is this victim focused? The potential to cause more harm, e.g. if it's refused during the exploratory process of RJ, or if the power imbalance or control is still apparent. What stage of recovery you're talking about there is the survivor at before this process starts. There's a huge concern about re-traumatization and further detriment to the young woman and her healing. There's a potential for distraction from their own recovery. There's a potential for manipulation of the system by the abuser for potential reduced sentencing. There's a potential for the abuser to further exploit the survivor. And what work would be done with the survivor prior to the meeting, and by who? Will they be trauma informed? Will they have a gendered approach? So Judith Herman and Lisa Keenan state that many victims of sexual violence find their peripheral position within the criminal justice process to be disempowering, and report frustration and dissatisfaction due to the lack of information regarding the criminal proceedings. And others find the adversarial character of the court processes and exchanges to be re-traumatizing. And Judith Herman also, and I quote, "It is argued that survivors' views of justice do not fit well either into retributive or restorative models. And this has implications for current efforts to use restorative models in cases of violence against women." So within Say Women, our young women, as with many survivors, have had to and still live with and are regularly triggered by memories of these crimes, by significant dates, by the thought of abusers getting out of prison, by the fear of being found. They hear their voices, they re-experience and relive abuse that has occurred sometimes many years ago. They experience powerlessness, vulnerability, fear, debilitation, humiliation, even dissociation and other health-related issues. And these are the inherent risks around face-to-face restorative justice in reality. Ideas that restorative justice will work for survivors of abuse are, in my view, at this point without merit. Restorative justice is relatively untried and untested for cases of sexual abuse and men's violence against women and girls. And as yet, we believe there's no compelling proof that it works. So having had these internal discussions, and believe me, it's challenging us, we will continue to have them, including with our advisory board members. I am now finding myself here in a position to put my view forward to you. So personally, I'm not opposed to restorative justice for lesser crimes. However, in my own view, and it is my own view that I put here, is that I would be against the proposal of using restorative justice at this point with cases of men's violence against women and girls.
Thank you. Excellent. So it's come up a few times, obviously, that there is the myths and the misconceptions. So first of all, I'll just let everyone know that's watching that on our YouTube channel, we worked with Alvar Griffith, who's been through restorative justice, and she made 10 great videos that it looks at the myths and misconceptions or the questions that people might have, and she's given an answer to them. So if anyone is unsure, please look at the YouTube channel and it might clear up some of the questions. But something that does come up quite a lot is this potential to be re-traumatized. So obviously it would be a choice. There's a long process into restorative justice. People can pull out at any point if they want to. But do you think, and Vicky, I'll ask you this first, because obviously you're a survivor and you're for the option to be put to you for restorative justice. Do you feel that perhaps you've got a view of what you're looking for going into this? And do you think that if you didn't get out of it what you thought you would, that could be re-traumatizing?
I think when you're in the position where you're in an abusive relationship, the trauma experienced is huge. For me, the mental side of things was I would probably say was worse than the physical side, which sounds ridiculous, but the mental scars remain there. In terms of re-traumatization, I think when you participate in something like restorative justice or given the option, you would go into that knowing, you know, the pros and cons of it and the risks associated with that. Certainly for me, personally, the negative impact on my mental health with the anxiety of the unknown, a lot of that could have been alleviated had restorative justice been an option for me. And I think my mental health could have greatly improved because I would have remained in control of the situation. And again, because I'm studying the fact that restorative justice is going to be rolled out across Scotland by 2023, restorative justice is well used in youth justice just now. And as Pam said, it could be particularly beneficial for lesser severe crimes. But if we don't try this and actually have a voice and give survivors that power to engage in something that could well help them long term, I think we're kind of doing ourselves I personally, if domestic abuse and sexual abuse was kept out of this national strategy plan, I would probably feel quite disempowered because you're taking away that choice from me.
Okay. Thanks, Vicky. So we have quite a lot of questions coming in from people watching. So I'm just going to go on to these, and please feel free just to answer if you want to. So first of all, so telling young women or young people at the beginning, yes, give some information, but who decides? When's the best time to go through this process? Is it something young women desire? Some young survivors are not aware of the risk of re-traumatization, may not have even established safety for themselves or have coping strategies to deal with this. How does duty of care fit into this?
I think that's why risk assessment is so important, and it needs to be a mutual, you know, that's what professionals involved in managing the case are there for, you know, to make that assessment as to whether it is suitable, whether the person, the perpetrator, is in a position where they would manipulate the situation for their own benefit, or whether they perhaps genuinely recognise the fact that they've done wrong and perhaps just want that opportunity to talk about what had went wrong.
Yeah. So Pam, obviously this is one that you touched on quite a lot there, that obviously there is a duty of care, there is this again, come back to re-traumatization. So what's your thoughts on this one about the duty of care side of it?
Well, again, it's what I said at the beginning, that I think a woman's recovery from such a horrific crime should be totally devoid of any involvement with the abuser. It should be about her own journey and her own well-being and her own strength and her own survival techniques and her own power and control on herself, rather than it being linked to anything to do with the abuser. I think for me, and I agree, it's up for personal choice, but from me representing a group of young women, I see the risks as being too great, that it could intertwine with their recovery and therefore be too damaging.
Thank you. Estelle, what's your, obviously you've seen this happen, so what duty of care have you seen within, you know, active cases?
Look, I think it has to be very clear that, you know, you don't start a case if there is still a risk. If you do not force or push someone to take this up. This is something that a person comes forward and says, I need to meet the offender, and there might be many different reasons. I mean, we talk a lot of sexual violence happens within families, with a brother, with a father, with an uncle, such cases. You know, the survivor needs to be away for sure for a long time, but at some point they might want to reconnect with their family in a safe way. And for that, the possibility of being able to talk to the offender in a safe place, well prepared, you know, having discussed all the possible re-traumatization, the possible risks that are included in all this, and offer this possibility for the person to go and talk with that person in that space is really important. And I completely agree with Vicky's assessment. I would find it such a injustice in a way not to allow this type of survivors to have the possibility to take this up if they felt the need to, absolutely in a safe place, prepared. You would never start such a process if you had not gone from the victim to the offender and discussed all these possible things that could happen. That's why you prepare every minute details. You might even script some of the conversations to make sure that that there is always a minimal risk of re-traumatization. That is clear. We are talking about humans here, but you know, in some cases, some people think this is still what they would like to do, and I think we have to listen to this.
Can I just quickly add, I think in terms of re-traumatization, that would probably happen to me if I walked past them in the supermarket, you know, because for me it's the unknown and not knowing what frame of mind he's in just now. So the re-traumatization could still happen to me, but at least if I was given the option to have restorative justice, that fears and anxieties could potentially be lessened in a safe environment, and then walking past them in the street or the supermarket could feel a lot safer for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. So another question we've got here is, how does RJ system guarantee safety to the victim of the crime during the meeting with the perpetrator? So I'm guessing this is coming back again to the same, it's the process before you get to that stage. But yeah, so Estelle, do you want to answer this one?
I just wanted to say that if there is any concern for safety, a process is stopped. You do not continue a process where there is not safety guaranteed. If two persons are in a room and someone feels unsafe, this obviously has to be stopped, because then it's not restorative at all. So, yeah, so.
It's definitely a question that keeps coming up in different ways the question is being asked, but there's obviously that worry and that big, you know.
If I may just add, if there is any doubt that there might be safety issues, then the case is not appropriate.
Yep. Okay. What are the panel's thoughts on a restorative process? Does anyone want to go for this one?
Estelle?
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's a very wide question, so I'm not sure exactly what you want us to talk, because we talked about this already in some ways.
Yeah. So perhaps if whoever asked that question's still on watching, if you can maybe put in more detail about what you're looking for there, or perhaps it's already been answered. And then the final question we've got here is, Vicky said earlier she would never have considered before. Why not then, and why now? And is this in any way relative to how she feels about her sense of power and control she has in her own life? So I think you have answered this one, but do you want to just clarify that, Vicky?
Yeah, I think I'm in a position now where I probably feel a lot, well, I am a lot stronger than what I was back then. I feel like I feel confident to express how, I'll openly talk to people about my experience, and I'm quite comfortable in my ability to do that. And I'm happy, and I feel in control of the situation. So I don't have concerns now like what I would have back then, because at that point my self-confidence and my self-esteem was at rock bottom. I'd been stripped of all of that. I was in a really, really bad place back then. And I think as time has gone on, and how I feel now, there is a lot of unanswered questions. And obviously, probably for him too, being in prison for the last 7 years and coming out into our local community where people know what he's done, people know what he's been found guilty of. And, there's not a forgive and forget here, because the trauma of what had happened will always be with me. There's no forgetting the experience. But for him, coming out into a community that knows what he's done must be quite frightening for him as well. And the unknown for him. And I suppose, looking at it from the other side, I would never have considered saying this a few years ago, but from the other perspective, having somebody coming out into the community and being isolated, living in fear, suffering poor mental health, anxiety, you're kind of asking for somebody to reoffend and go back to prison. What's he got to live for in the current circumstances? So if restorative justice was openly available and it's something that he would have accepted and that I was willing to participate in, I'd like to think his reintegration and rehabilitation back into the community could have been made probably a more positive experience for him as well as myself.
That's a very strong and powerful view to have, to be able to say that about somebody who has abused. And I think this always come back to, obviously, Pam, what you're saying is that the process that you use is about the women healing themselves and coming out of it. And obviously, Vicky, it sounds like you've gone through that process but obviously before it wouldn't have been appropriate. So, Pam, would you agree on that, or what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, again, I mean, I'm not coming here from a judgmental point of view to say to any young woman that you're ready for this or you're not. It's down to individual choice. But when you're measuring the safety and the risks, you know, we're always advising our young women about the risks associated with things. And when you're measuring the risks, it's about the emotional maturity and the confidence of the young woman, because the risks are so high with the process. So you have to be able to cope with the risks of the process and be emotionally strong enough to cope with it, that it wouldn't send you back in your previous stages of recovery. So yeah, it's again back to original choice, but with it being truly informed of all the risks, truly informed, and how you can control in a restorative justice conversation what is going to come out of somebody's mouth. I don't know. So you could go through the whole system and then sit in a room with somebody and all of a sudden he laughs at you. How will that affect your recovery journey? And that is my argument about the potential risks it can have. My job is to protect our young women. My job is to make sure that their recovery is independent of all of this and that they carry out a fulfilled life. If they choose to go down this route, yes, we would support them, but it's to make sure that they're emotionally able to cope with that kind of rejection that could come, even through the process. If they start the process and they get totally engaged with it and all of a sudden they're told that the abuser doesn't want to carry on, where's that power going on again? It's an imbalance of power, and all of a sudden the recovery journey is needing to re-energize. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Pam. So we've got another question here. So this says, going back to the original question that we asked for the person watching to clarify. So what they asked was, what are the panel's thoughts on restorative process if the offender did not agree, or if there was no conviction? Is there another way to have a restorative process? Estelle, is that clearer?
Yeah.
I think I could maybe come in here, because actually one of our young women talked to me about this, where they potentially wanted to not necessarily talk to the abuser, but to talk to the criminal justice process that was involved in when they were going through the arrest, if you like, or the declaration of the abuse. So like the policemen that were involved. So that maybe be where the query comes around about a restorative process, rather than it being about the process of the crime and the journey of the crime and those that were involved in the court proceedings even, that could there be something restorative with that? I'm guessing that's what that might mean.
Yeah, that's another angle on it. Yeah, definitely. Estelle, what about yourself? I hadn't thought of that side of it. Yeah, that's another option.
I can answer the question though.
About the fact that an offender might not want to take part, as said, it has to be voluntary by both sides, otherwise it doesn't work. I mean, that's a fact that you cannot, or then the risks are increased drastically, so obviously would not be appropriate. The thing is that, having talked to survivors who've gone through this, and very recently, again, I've heard about a survivor who many years after her victimization decided to go down that route and said, I really need to speak to the offender, and I really need this now for my own recovery, etc., etc. So the case was taken on and they started looking for the offender, but they started preparing her. And the fact is that the offender said no. It is a fact, this happens. And my question to her was like, but so what happened to you? How do you feel? And she said, but the fact of having decided to do this was part of the process, was part of, this has given me back my power. This is the first time I decided this is what I'm going to do to recover this. And actually, I don't really care not having met the offender. that's it. It would have been another part of the process, but actually that first process for me was the most important. I feel now I can move on. That's her experience, and I cannot speak for other survivors, and you know, but I'm just the other question about the fact if it doesn't go to court, if it's not, as we know, most sexual violence, I mean, about 5% of all sexual violence actually gets to court with a conviction. So Vicky's case, in a way, is a very positive one from that side of things. Restorative justice is, and that's a thing, we get a lot of people coming forward asking for restorative justice who have not gone to court for many different reasons. Some because it has happened a very long time ago, or some because it was within their own family and they did not want, some because they are still scared of, but there are possibilities there as well. As said, it can be with firewalls between the services. It can be, as said, I still repeat and repeat, it's just not always appropriate. And there are many cases where probably it would be better that it first is dealt with by the criminal justice system, if there's still a possibility to do that before an RJ process would be undertaken. But each case is different, and each case can be looked at by an RJ program to see whether there is a possibility, whether it's realistic, whether it's appropriate, and then see from there.
But the importance is giving people a choice.
Absolutely, yeah.
Excellent. Does anyone have anything else they want to discuss, either between yourselves or questions for each other? No. So thank you so much. I am aware that we said we'll finish by 7 o'clock and it's 25 past, but what you guys were saying was so interesting. There is loads of great comments and feedback and questions on the chat on Facebook. So I would urge all of you to go and have a look and see if you can give your feedback to people as well. So just from Survivors' Voices, we do want to, it's quite clear that there's so many questions, so many different opinions on this, and the consultation that Survivors' Voices has put together for people, for survivors, it doesn't matter if you believe in it or don't believe in it, if you want it or not. The purpose in the paper is to get survivors' feedback. It's non-biased from Survivors' Voices' point of view. Whatever it comes back with, that's what matters. It's about the voice of the survivor, hence Survivors' Voices, the name. So please do, if you are a survivor, have a look over it. Also, from the duty of care point of view from Thriving Survivors, obviously, if you are filling this in and you do feel that you need some support, then we always put on Isobel's email address. Drop her an email, she will phone you and speak to you, so people aren't on their own. Going back to the myths and misconceptions, please do go to our YouTube channel. There are loads of questions and answers on there. And again, you can contact Thriving Survivors at any point. If you are interested in knowing more before doing whether you're an organisation, an individual, or you are a survivor thinking about filling in the consultation, we do have 3 information sessions every week. Again, every other day there's a post on social media where you can go on and book them. There are varying times through morning, afternoon and evening, and there are sessions where we'll go through how it all came about, the misconceptions, and just any questions you have. That's a good place to ask there as well. And finally, we will have another panel next Wednesday. So we've got a panel at 7:30 every Wednesday with different people from organisations, survivors, experts, and it's just to share as many opinions and discuss it openly so people can learn more. And I think I've covered everything. So Pam, Vicky, Estelle, thank you so much for coming on tonight. Jackie and Victoria keeping me right with the questions. Yeah, if you three could pop onto the Facebook, have a look at comments and answer any other questions. There's been a lot of engagement tonight and I've got it next to my phone and it's still moving, it's still going. So thank you so much. We will be downloading this and we'll get it onto YouTube tomorrow if anyone's missed it, and feel free to share it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.